just what he does. You call him, he's going to call you back and not because he doesn't have anything better to do, but because if you call him, he wants to recognize that and respond to it. That's what he does.
Yeah, he is. He is about the connection. That's for sure.
Bill, what are you doing now?
So I know I actually got hired back by my previous company that laid me off in January. So it worked out. Things have come full circle. Good. So they realized as an organization, the new business existing role split wasn't working out for them. So they created a hybrid. I got lucky. Somebody that was there a long time left, and you never burn a bridge, and they brought me back. So that all worked out well.
Good.
Very cool. Now, Bill, we don't know each other. So catch me up. What type of company?
Sure. It's SunGuard Availability Services. So I've got a kind of a crazy background. I sold fitness equipment. This is going to date me, but I sold fitness equipment for 20 years. I went to work at Abbott Labs and a competitor in the medical industry. I went back to fitness because I love it. And I believe that you need to just keep your body sharp, keep your mind sharp. And then one of my indoor cycling students was the SVP at Cisco. And he's like, hey, do you ever think about joining Cisco? And I was like, no, but okay. And so I worked at Cisco and got into the IT world. And from there, that's kind of where I've just planted my flag. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So now are you still at Cisco? Is that?
No, I left, you never leave a job, but you leave a manager. And there were some unethical things going on, and I mean, just leave it at that. Great company, but most of my cadre of friends and specialists that supported me in the enterprise space, they're all gone. So I went to a Cisco partner and then tried to help a little medical startup and then ended up at SunGuard. So I decided, listen, the world's changing, as we all know, at rapid speed from a technology perspective. And, that's a great place to be. And I work, I like my manager. So that works out really well. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. So now tell us so that we can be kind of what's the best way that we can help you?
I think your Monday musings have been great because it's kind of that Monday morning slap in the face, like, hey, listen, and I think your takeaways, and it's funny because I used to live in Atlanta. I used to live in Cumming, Georgia, and I know you're doing ATL. So I love it. I love the cost of housing, but I think your takeaway from Outbound was everybody's really overcomplicating this.
Yeah.
And it's, I'm reading Stop Selling and Start Leading. I'm reading about probably 6 different books at this time, but that one's been really resonating. I got through Blink. I actually did the Blinkist version of it as kind of a refresher for today.
Yes, so did I.
That's what I did.
I discovered that app through somebody else that I listened to, but I think just the biggest thing is you guys keep driving home, keep it simple. I've been reading Jeff's book on prospecting, and that's something that, as I look back over my career, and it's going to date me. So, and thank God I don't have gray hair yet, or at least you can't, I think prospecting comes down to being able to add value. And so if I can keep learning ways to add value with every interaction, I think it's going to, put me ahead of the game. And you guys, I don't know if you've looked at the book Combo Prospecting, Tony Hughes, that had a lot of great nuggets. Like, and the other part about it, it's not rocket science, but have a plan. And you can have, Sales Loft and Salesforce and all those things. But again, if you don't have a plan, I think you'll fail. So
right. Well, and Sales Loft and Salesforce are great tools, but they are tools. You still have to build the house. So you've got to go through that process and put your work in. Do you like that metaphor? You like that? Thought that was good.
It was just the way it came. Just there was.
The magic just happens that way. That's
a Monday musing right there.
The other thing
you take it.
That I realized is you got to know, play where you can win. Play to your strengths. When I joined SunGuard last year in August, they said, hey, our sweet spot, but 200 million to 2 billion, you're probably going, that's a huge window. And I said, no, wait a minute. I went to marketing. I'm like, come on, where are we winning? Is it 5 to 700? What vertical? Because I want to be really strategic. If we're winning in, the healthcare vertical where I spent some time at Cisco, I want to be going there and hammering there. And then as I branch out to the outliers, I'll start being able to say, hey, listen, we want a deal at Lululemon in Canada. We want a deal, at Miller Coors. That's one of my accounts. Or we want a deal at Kohl's department store.
It's a good account to have, by the way.
Yeah. I saw you drinking some beers and some pictures. So yeah.
Wait. No, I didn't have a beer in front of me in that picture. I'd already finished it. It was
so, it's just trying to be strategic, like be simple, but be strategic. Like if you know where you win, keep going there and then take those wins. And that's one thing I think maybe people forget. It's like, if you've been really successful somewhere, whether it's a vertical or an account, use that because someone's going, why should I trust you? Why should I do what they did? Hey, listen, this customer had this business challenge and we were able to solve that business challenge by X. And so I'm trying to be really good at that. So I don't have the answers after being in sales 25 plus years, but I'm always learning. So,
well, that is the answer, right? You just can't stop. You can't stop learning. You can't stop moving down that path.
Mm-hmm.
And I think every day it's like, Jeff talked about his meditation and I've been using the app Headspace. And I actually finally, I don't know if it was through you, Jeff, or somehow I was able to see the guy who actually has the voice in Headspace.
Yeah.
I caught a TED Talk and I was like, so that's what this dude looks like.
He's a monk, right? Or he was a monk.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that I was like, wow. So now when I listen to Headspace, I kind of have this vision of who's actually talking me through.
Right.
Oh,
Talk about that would be a dream interview right there. That would be like up there with like Seth Godin and Simon Sinek. I would love to have Andy on.
I'm efforting.
Yeah, that was great. That was really.
I'm working that.
You are?
Well, not yet, but I'm gonna.
All right, I like it. I had to put it out there before you would work it.
No, I've been thinking about it for a while. I'm just glad that you think it'd be a great interview.
Because I do the same thing. I'm not nearly as consistent as Jeff is. And I tend to do it Monday through Friday. For some reason, Saturday and Sunday, it all falls apart. I don't know why that is.
And when I'm on vacation, it's tough too. It's anytime it's part of your routine until you're out of your routine. And then the whole thing tends to go. That's an interesting thing. And perhaps we haven't picked a book for May yet, but the May execution month, there should be something perhaps about routines and things like that. And,
I want the one thing. That book has been on my mind.
Yeah.
And I've been listening to those guys on their podcast, and I'm so obsessed.
That's another book that I've already read, so I don't need to buy it again, and I don't need to read it again. That's awesome.
There you go. Have you read that book, Bill?
I have. I'm trying to think what podcast. Maybe it might have been Tim Ferriss, and then I know you just recently brought it up, and I actually had the book. And I'm sure you guys have had this. You go in your library and you're like, I actually read that, and I didn't remember it. So I bought I drive a lot, or I was taking the train into Chicago, and I was like, all right, let me knock this out. And, because sometimes I like the tactile sense of having the real book, but sometimes the speed and efficiency of, hey, listen, I can't carry all these books with me.
Yeah, right.
Kindle or an iPad works, but and I went and revisited it, and again, it's some really simple things.
When I buy a book anymore, it's almost for show. It's almost just to put on the shelf behind me, because chances are I've listened to it on Audible, or I bought it on iBooks or something, so that I have it on my phone. I have it on my iPad. Wherever I am, I've got a book. So if I'm sitting down waiting for something somewhere, where if I'm on a plane, if I'm at the airport, if I'm waiting on a meeting, whatever it is, I've got something in front of me, and there it is. And that is really, really helpful to me. So, I mean, it's the tactile sense I get, especially during golf season. My hands get a little roughed up, and so it tends to get annoying. The page on my thumb, it's dry skin. You guys are laughing at me like I'm joking. I'm dead serious. This gets really frustrating.
First world problems right there, my friend.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, well, and I feel the same way. I start with Audible books, and I will listen to them on drives or just in the car going from client meeting to client meeting. And if the book really speaks to me and I'm like, I want to go back and I feel like I missed a couple of pieces, then I go and buy the book. And it's interesting because probably 1 out of 10 I find that I want to go and actually buy the book. It feels like there's so much more meat there. The interesting thing about the one thing for me, that particular book, and I know we're not here to talk about that, but it's only 3 of us. And so we get to choose whatever the hell we want to talk about, right? So the interesting thing about the One Thing book for me is I actually had a former boss of mine bought the books for a discussion in a sales meeting a few years back. And I loved the concept. I loved the idea. Never really sat down and read the book. And it wasn't until I found the One Thing podcast and I started consistently listening to what they are doing there and just some of the things that they have done with that organization over the last couple of years. It keeps bringing it back to me. And this whole theme of focus and simplify is huge. And we see it all the time with small businesses. We see it all the time with, actually, it doesn't matter what your business is. Focus is the key element of success. A lot of times you've got really smart people. They know exactly what to do, but they can't get out of their own way. And it's because there isn't just one thing. There are 15 things. And you just can't focus on 15 things.
Yeah, that's I read Keenan's book, Not Taught, and I think I had discovered him before you guys had him on, but I was laughing because I knew he was going to drop a few F-bombs. And
we call that one K-rated. That was Keenan rated.
K for Keenan.
Yep. I mean, that's a great story because I didn't really first off, it took me a while to figure out what is his name, and then I figured out it's actually Jim. That kind of I backed into it. So yeah.
So let's talk about Blink.
Yeah.
We've got May's book. Okay, so we're making a formal announcement. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, dun, dun. The May Book Club is going to be the One Thing.
Is the podcast, you recommend the podcast, Christy?
I do.
Okay.
I really do. Now, remember, though, I am a coach by nature, so by nature and by trade. And these guys are coaches. So part of the coach's structure is to get you to that one thing that you can take action on. And the guy that runs the podcast, and I cannot remember his name right now, does such a good job even coaching celebrities on the podcast from time to time. So they had the master. I'm going to so mess this up. So if you're ex-military, forgive me. They had the chief master sergeant for the Air Force on the podcast last week, and he talked about how they utilize the One Thing in their strategy sessions, and how interesting it was because that particular portion of the military was so focused on multitasking that it was hard to get them to narrow it down.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I know you guys covered Jocko Willink's book, who I discovered multiple years ago, and if you guys ever score him, that would be crazy.
Oh, that would crack me up. That would be funny.
I wanted to try to attend one of his musters, but it's just timing is always the issue, and
right.
I like it though that they're up at Jocko and Leif are up at 3:30 to work out, and then they work out with everybody else at 4:30, and I like stuff like that. That's good. So, Blink,
I have recommended that book a lot to a number of clients.
Their podcast, I mean, it's a great podcast, but sometimes they get lost in the weeds on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so if you aren't a practitioner, you kind of sit back and you just have to kind of get through that part of it. But there's been some great guests that he's had on, and he had on a company, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. I know we're missing on Blink, but it's kind of important. Origin Maine and I forget the guy's name, but it's a company out of Maine, and they produce gis, and they wanted to do it all in the U.S. And the whole story of the guy, and actually I buy Jocko's protein powder from there because I want to support a U.S. company. And the guy searched all through Maine to find this loom, and they found it in this old building, and it was beat up. And he found it's kind of like, Jeff, I know you're in Michigan, but it's like guys that are in the, my uncle works on old time cars. I don't know how he figures out how to put a Hemi in a 32 Ford, but found these guys that knew how to fix this loom, and they got it working, and they've been using that on top of now others to reduce their geese, which are fabulous fabric. And it was just a great story of how this guy like searched throughout and he wanted to keep it in Maine. And anyway, it was just kind of a really cool story. So when Jocko has people on like that, it's just fascinating that, you know, they don't give up, they don't quit, and they have success. So
nice. Now, are you a practitioner?
I am not. I used to race triathlon competitively. Now I just do a lot of cycling. Like last weekend, I put in 120 miles and it was 30 degrees Saturday and Sunday morning. But,
yeah, it's chilly.
That's just that on top of doing strength training. That's my morning meditation. It gets me going.
Nice. Nice. Excellent. All right. Blink.
I think, you know, I kept hearing him use the word thin slicing.
Yep.
And I started thinking about that and thinking, do I really do that? And then I find out I actually do really do that.
Yeah.
And that was kind of and it's not in a negative sense, but I just found it, you know, like I do really thin slice. And I think most of the times, most of my thin slices have been pretty accurate. I've been wrong a few times, but it was just interesting that he used the word thin slice for maybe, you know, first impression or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It's, I think the way you're describing it is the way most people experience it. More often than not, you're right on, and it's uncanny. And sometimes you're not. Okay, that's going to happen. More often than not, you're right. And the interesting thing is he goes into a couple of examples in the book where when you have too much information sometimes, like when they're talking about the war games and what is it, the Millennium Challenge, right? Yeah. And, you know, well, certainly they would do it this and this and this and this and this. And when you overthink, and I'm guilty of this a lot, when you overthink something, sometimes that's what gets you in trouble. When you have too much information to go through, when you have too much data to sift through, sometimes you know, it's sometimes that's detrimental. And it's not always that the gut feeling is the right feeling, because how many times have you hired someone or heard of someone who's made hiring decisions based on gut feelings and then they're gone, right? They just terrible mistakes that get made. So there's a reason, you know, data is valuable, but you know, that first impression says a lot. And you know, when this book gave credence to me to, you know, when your kids say they just get a creepy feeling about somebody, maybe it's best to steer away.
Yeah.
Right. When you just get the creeps by saying, and look, maybe they're not doing anything. You can't objectively notice anything about these people that you could literally call out. Right. You can't document that they're doing something heinous. Right. But you just don't know about those people. Whew. Sometimes you give them a second shot. Sometimes you just better to steer clear. And I'm right about that more often than more often than I'm wrong. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. My favorite quote from the book was the key to good decision making is not knowledge, it is understanding. We are swimming in the former and we are desperately lacking in the latter. And I thought that just kind of summed it all up for us. And especially in today's society where buyers are, you know, we talk about how well educated our buyers are, but in essence, in a lot of cases, they're just really overwhelmed. They don't know, they have so much information, they don't know what to do, and they're paralyzed. And so they look to us as salespeople to be able to walk them through it and help them make the right decision. And if you can become that trusted partner, that's a huge element. You know, it's interesting. I'm going to have to kind of do some additional thinking on my level of thin slicing. I have always tried to kind of take a back seat to making immediate judgments, but I also believe some of the science in, you know, what he put in the book, which is everybody does it. You have to. It's human nature. So it's just interesting, this concept of balance between knowledge and understanding.
We've been taught for so long that you can't judge a book by its cover, that you forget that there's a very specific reason the cover looks that way. Sometimes you can, sometimes you should. And I love your quote about the difference between knowledge and understanding. You know, I think And to the earlier point that Bill made about your Monday musing and your response to Outbound and how we're overcomplicating everything, let's try to stay out of our own way when it comes to these things.
Yeah.
You know, listen, you see a dark alley with a bunch of graffiti and some burned out tires and things like that, probably not a good place to go there. You know what I mean? It's probably not a good idea to go there. There are reasons that, not reasons that stereotypes exist, but we've got previous experience that informs our current or future decisions. And you can't dismiss that just because someone told you when you were 6 years old that you can't judge a book by its cover. Like there's sometimes those parables and those axioms get us into more trouble than they keep us out of.
Yeah, that makes sense. My daughter is a freshman in college. My son's a junior in high school. So he switched from the Apple ecosystem to Samsung, whatever. It was his choice. It was his birthday. And so we go to the AT&T store. What I'm trying to teach him is don't judge a book by the cover, but have the ability to do some research. So the long and short of it is the guy that was helping us out had a lot of tattoos, African-American guy. And, my son's kind of an introvert. So I try to teach him, like, listen, sometimes you just have to be interested in other people. And you'll never know. Or if I wasn't interested in the guy that took my cycling class that worked at Cisco, I would have never gotten into Cisco. One day I was like, hey, what do you do? And then he's like, yeah, I work at Cisco. And then I kind of figured things out. But the guy had a lot of tattoos. So I was like, hey, what's the story with your tattoos? Not meaning anything derogatory, just like there's somebody that has that much body art.
There's a story.
He went out like an hour. And then we saw him like a week later. And he bought my son a coffee. And the whole point I was trying to teach my son is like, yes, you could have said, listen, this guy is an African-American guy, got tattoos, but you opened the book a little bit and you found out he's actually a pretty nice, interesting guy. So I think sometimes with the thin slicing, you maybe have to go, for me, I have to go another level deeper or turn a few pages per se.
Yeah, no, and that's a perfect example of when that makes sense, right? Because we're coming out of I don't know, it's maybe a little grandiose to call it an era, but a time when tattoos were kind of taboo. And now I swear there are more people with tattoos than without it.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so now it's not just the tattoos. Now it's the, if you're curious about tattoos, if you ever wonder, almost every single tattoo, well, I'm sure of it actually, because that's the reason. Every tattoo that's out there has a story. And so now it's not about the tattoos, it's about the story behind the tattoos. And, some tattoos mean something, right? And very specifically, and those are your warning signs to stay away. But someone who's just covered, who's got sleeves, it's like, oh man, what? All right. I don't have any tattoos, but tell me the story because I know there's a story. And then you'll see those people light up. It's a totally different affect than just someone who, wow, that person looks dangerous because they've got ink on their arms, right? You can't be that way anymore.
I have a funny story about that. So my sister is 10
telling
years
us about your tattoos?
Yes, I'm telling you about my tattoos. No, I have no tattoos. But my sister's 10 years younger, and she went to the University of Georgia. And when she graduated, I took her to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for a little kind of just beach weekend. Mm-hmm. And I lived in California at the time. We had never been to Myrtle Beach. I didn't, I was like, well, it's a beach town. Let's go. And so we arrived in Myrtle Beach, and this was a few years ago. So we were young and cute girls, and we got into town, and we're like, wow, there's a lot of people here. I wonder what's going on. It turned out it was Bike Week at Myrtle Beach. And neither one of us are tattooed. It's not bikers, none of that. And we spent 2 days kind of trying to avoid the crowds. Sure. And then we finally just said, you know what, screw it. We're going, there's a bar across the street, and we're going to go and do dance and, all of those things. And we walk in the bar, and it was almost like a movie scene, right? Where, and I have no idea what we were wearing. I'm sure it was sundresses or something not biker-like. And so we walk in the bar, and it's like the music, kind of scratches off, and everything gets really quiet. That's what it felt like anyway. And so what started out as something where we were avoiding what we believed was this this other part of society, we had the most amazing night. I mean, we were just really nice people. I mean, it wasn't anything to be concerned about. We just were not aware and had never been exposed to it. So, and we were young. So it was just a very interesting, it's a cemented part of my history that reminds me never to assume that what a particular subset of the population might be like. This was just, I mean, these were, some people our age, some people a lot older than us. And now it's very mainstream, but, then it was a little bit different. So it was just a lot of fun, and we had a blast for the rest of our trip. And we didn't avoid anyone. So, yeah.
Well, what's interesting about biases and thin slicing and all that, and Malcolm talks about it in, I think it's in chapter 2, maybe it's chapter 3. He's talking about biases and I can tell you where I was when I listened to it, but I can't tell you which chapter it was. But he was talking about how the biases, racial biases, and he's like, I keep taking this test, and I'm biased toward black people. He's like, I'm half black. I would have never thought that I was biased toward black people, but given everything that we're all subjected to, it's like even people who say that they are not biased turn out to be biased when you can actually put them through a validated test. And I think that that's a powerful concept. And I think that's a powerful concept because we all have reactions, and it means that this thin slicing thing, Bill, when you said, yeah, I didn't think I did that, then I realized that I did. No, we all do it. It's really impossible to avoid. And not only do we do it, but sometimes it's very difficult to really objectively look at what those biases say. And sometimes it's uncomfortable to think about what those biases say about me. Here's the author who's actually biased toward people in his own family in the wrong way. And that's really, really a strong concept, I think. And from no other point of view than just recognizing that those biases exist. And I think that's an important piece of information to have when you think about the way you make decisions.
You guys remember that book, The Millionaire Next Door? I mean, it's long. The author, this is a long time ago, came and spoke at a sales meeting, and that kind of resonated as I started thinking about, Jeff, what you just said about the racial bias, but then, don't judge a book by its cover. I remember this guy came to a sales meeting or a function I was at, and he presented it, and he put up slides, and he said, and it was like maybe 10 slides, and they were covers of like Carburetor Rebuilder Monthly, Road and Paving, and he's like, millionaire. And I just walked away, and I grew up in this little small town west of Milwaukee, and the only claim to fame in my hometown is that, J.J. Watt's dad and I played football together, and the boys went to high school, but I'm not at that talent level. But it's a really small town, and there were a lot of farmers still around there, and I'm sure now that I think back on it, like there could have been some of these, and it's not so much about the millionaire, it's like this guy might have dressed, in his overalls and boots with who knows what on it, but he was smart and smart enough to put his money away. So that got me thinking about this thin slicing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are people that, they don't do anything flashy and they're millionaires and don't make a judgment. So
the line that I remember from that book, because I could only get about a third of the way through it because it was so dry, and this was before audible.com. I remember I gave it to my dad. I might have it behind me somewhere, but or it might be upstairs on the other bookshelf. But the thing that I remember, the line was, I only drink 2 kinds of beer, Budweiser and free. I remember that line from the book. But the other thing was just about the whole concept of it, of the people who live that lifestyle often don't have the means to do so, or they don't have the means because they live that lifestyle. Meanwhile, the people who, no, it's not just about living modestly or living, below your means or within your means. It's about, okay, what's really important to you? Is it really important to drive a super fancy, really expensive car? If it is, then okay, go ahead. But what you find is that some people are just more concerned with the day-to-day. They don't get caught up in the ego of things. And when you don't get caught up in the ego of things, you don't have anything to spend that money on. I think about a lot of people who, especially, like I'm in Detroit. We're up here in the Rust Belt. Bill, you can identify with this. You get a lot of people who worked in factories, who made things with their hands, who were parts of that machine, so to speak, skilled trades and things. And, for a while, especially in the early 2000s, late 90s, the getting was good as far as overtime was concerned. I literally remember working myself in summer jobs, and my dad working a lot. He was an electrician. You work so often or work so much, you don't have time to spend the money.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, what are you going to do? Well, they're offering more overtime. Okay. I remember there'd be 7 day, 10-hour weeks. You're working 70 hours. You don't get a break. You don't get a weekend. You just keep going. And all of a sudden that paycheck comes. You're like, well, I'd like to go do something, but I got to work. And you go back on Monday. So a lot of times those blue collar workers were the ones who were most well-to-do, but you wouldn't notice because they don't live that life. And yeah, I remember that book. I remember a couple of those early lessons from that book, because like I said, it was so dry I could not get through it. But
was that Blanchard who wrote that one?
No, I don't think so. I'll look it up.
Yeah, I can't remember.
I remember too, another scenario very similar is I did some personal training over the years, and one of my clients trained a lot of people. I live in the northern far. I actually live pretty close to Wisconsin, but I'm still one of the northern burbs of Chicago, and there's the North Shore. So it's where the Bulls used to train, and she used to work where the Bulls trained back in the earlier heyday area of the Jordan era. Anyway, she would do manicure and pedicure to a lot of athletes, and it's very wealthy people. And I say, like, what's it like? She's like, Bill, you'd be surprised at the number of houses I go into that half the rooms are empty. So it was kind of like, and I'm not, again, that's totally your call if that's what you want to do, but it was more about the show, less about the go. And that was kind of an awakening, like, yeah, you know what? It's everybody processes things their own way, and if that's what they're into, great. But, I'm driving a car that's paid off, so I feel pretty good about it at the end of the day.
So I'm interested, you guys, in your takeaway from the book on the differences between judgment, thin slicing, and intuition. Because there are times when you want to listen, and then there are times where you want to say, hey, wait a second, that's a little too quick.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on that?
It's a great question. I think that all of those first impressions are legitimate. And I think that, if it's within the first, I think he says 2 seconds, I think within the first 2 seconds, you make up your mind. I think in the first 2 seconds, unless you are totally ruling something out, like I'm not going there, I don't like anything about that person, there's no way I'm even coming close, then I think what you owe yourself is another 2 seconds. And I think, if you can make decisions in 2-second increments, at least about your impressions, I think that goes a long way. There have been people where I've given them an extra 5 minutes and I've changed my mind about them. There have been people I've given an extra 2 minutes and I am only confirmed in my initial impression. So I think the, intuition, impression, and judgments, I think those things run together. But there's a lot of overlap there. That's a pretty tight Venn diagram there. But I think allowing yourself to validate that first 2-second impression, I think is important. There's a reason you feel the way you feel in the first 2 seconds. Notice that. Don't try to talk yourself out of it. If anything, look to confirm it. And that's the way that's what I've taken from this is, listen, your first impressions are valid, and sometimes over-analysis is exactly the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. And I get that. I guess what I'm a little confused on is because you take that first 2 seconds, for example, that judgment honestly isn't about the other individual. That's about all the experiences you've had before you met that individual.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
yeah. What's wrong with that?
What's that?
What's wrong with that, though?
Well, what could be wrong with that is that you're assuming that just because you have met someone that looks or acts a similar way, that this individual is going to be exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen from experience that that's not necessarily the case.
Right.
And so there's a subtle distinction that I think that I might have missed in listening to Malcolm's book on where do these things stack? Because there is a point, and I have been there, where that first 2 seconds was wrong, dead wrong.
Me too. More often than not, though, it's right.
Do you think there's a continuum, though? Do you know what I mean? Like, intuition means maybe if I've never talked to Jeff ever, I have this intuition. And then after I've talked to him, I create a judgment. I don't know. I started thinking of it in lines of a continuum, but I'm not sold on it. That's all I'm just kind of thinking about. Like, or does it could all happen at once.
Right.
Tell me more about the continuum, but paint that picture.
I'm thinking to myself, like, intuition. Let's use the tattoo example. My first intuition, if I grew up in Chicago, might be, hey, tattoos are bad. Stay away from an African-American in tattoos because that means gangbanger. That could be my first intuition. And that could be coupled with thin slicing, where I just look at the guy and maybe look at how he was dressed and his hair. I'm making all these, and that's also a judgment. But I was just thinking my judgment could change after I said, hey, what's the story with your tattoos? And all of a sudden I find out there's a story, and some of these are representative of how much pride he feels in growing up in Chicago. And I was, which could have changed my judgment. So I don't know. I thought maybe there was a continuum, but maybe not. I don't know. That's just.
Well, and I think there's a presence element too, right? So am I present in this moment?
Yep.
Enough to truly make that judgment or thin slicing. And then is the other individual also present, or am I judging what is basically a distracted version of them? Does that make sense? I got really philosophical on this.
Well, you did. But I like your presence kind of point, because are you mindful enough that your first impressions may or may not be valid? Are you mindful of what your first impression of an individual like that would be right now versus what it would have been 10 years ago? And are you, Bill, like you said, where you grew up a long time ago, you would have just steered clear of that kind of a person. Now you're curious enough to say, hey, I know you got a story. What's the story? This ought to be cool. And you're showing your son the same thing. Right. So I think being aware of your personal experience that leads up to that moment, being aware that, hey, I would have written someone like that off, but now that seems to be kind of the norm. Maybe I need to change. Maybe I need to consciously be aware of the way that I am biasing these things and these people. And then your presence of mind in that moment goes to inform the second 2 seconds, like I mentioned before. And I still see it. Sometimes it's whoa, that person. And then I have to, in the next 2 seconds, have to think, oh yeah, but I know someone with a similar story. I know someone covered in tattoos. I know someone, I've got experience with people like this person who I'm assuming this person to be, and I was wrong in the past. So, I think the problem becomes when people are so closed-minded that they don't allow for any latitude one way or another from that initial impression. They don't learn from the accumulation of their experiences. And they're not able to interpret all of that. And that's a very mindful place to come from, which goes down your philosophical path.
Yes. Well, and he did talk about the fact that stress can lead our gut astray. So if your gut has a certain reaction in those first 2 minutes, stress is going to distort that. So it's going to distort that perception. It's going to send a different signal to your brain than you might have had if you were in a mindful place.
Right.
So there is an element, it almost feels to me as though he presented in Malcolm Gladwell's amazingly genius way, a lot of really good arguments for how judgment and trusting your gut is a valid way to get through life. but that awareness is more important than any other skill in, especially when it comes to perceptions and judgments and decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about more knowledge necessarily, but it is about being aware of what's driving your decisions. That seem
I like that.
on par with what you guys were thinking?
Definitely works for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I love the
Jerry?
way he writes.
I love Malcolm. He's, I listened to, it wasn't a TED Talk. It was actually, it looked like it was a lecture about the spaghetti sauce guy. Do you remember that one?
That's a TED Talk. He's got
that a TED
yeah, he's got a
Okay.
couple of different TED Talks, but yeah, that's a good one. Yeah,
Okay.
the visible
I don't
solids.
remember the TED logo behind him, but yeah, that was pretty impressive. I mean, just the guy can talk about nothing, and I will listen for hours.
Yeah, that story is in another book of his called "What the Dog Saw," and he goes. There's a good 30 minutes. That's an essay. Well, "What the Dog Saw" is a compendium of a lot of his essays that he wrote for the New Yorker. So he selected a bunch of them and then put them all together. It was, I don't know if this was the case, but it was almost as if he needed to put together another book to finish his contract and kind of threw some of his work together. But there is a ton. One of the best essays I've ever read by him was about Ron Popeil and the Set It and Forget It Showtime rotisserie and his roots and his family lineage as Jersey Shore pitchmen. And I mean, from a selling standpoint, I mean, I took a different perspective, if you'll pardon that, about all the infomercials and things. He was the father of the modern infomercial, and his relentless pursuit of quality and making sure that the product did exactly what it was supposed to do, and then making it the star of the show, and just the whole routine. And he telling that story about he was in Ron Popeil's kitchen, and there were like 8 versions of the rotisserie on the counter, constantly just cooking chickens, because if they didn't make it perfectly every time, that iteration got revised in some way. And then there was another thing. You want to talk about the mundane. Why are there 40 different kinds of mustard on the shelf at your grocery store, but only like 2 kinds of ketchup? You want to talk about the different senses of the tongue and things like that. He takes the mundane and makes it brilliantly fascinating. And he's got a masterclass now too. I think it's masterclass.com about how to write. And I'm like, yeah, that might be worth $100.
Yeah, he does know. Well, and the other thing too is that he can take any story and break it down. I think that's the thing. That's where it would be interesting to learn from him. Because he does he's just brilliant at how he breaks things down. So, yeah.
I like hearing him on the Bill Simmons podcast occasionally, talking about sports. He's a semi-elite runner, like semi-elite. I don't think he was quite Olympic talent, but like the guy can still run a sub 5-minute mile. And really a big basketball fan. And just, I mean, he can talk sports. And he's fascinating. And every once in a while he gets a little fired up and swears. I mean, it's pretty cool.
Wow, that's like a whole different side.
No, he's got this very demure kind of affect about him. And, but you get him worked out. He's a good hang. Like, he appears to me to be the guy, a guy that I could just have a beer with and just really enjoy the hell out of talking to, because he's interesting. Yeah, no, I love the way he writes. I love the way he tells stories. And I think, if we want to tie this back to salespeople and the listeners of our show, I mean, there's value in learning how to tell a story. There's value in learning the elements of it and how to weave them all together. And what Malcolm does very well, and this is what I love about all his books, is, he'll have 3 or 4 sections in the book. And each section will be subdivided into 3 or 4 sections. And then within each section, the 3 or 4 subsections wrap together to tell a story about that section. And then at the end of the book, each of the 3 larger sections wrap together in one main idea, but in a very circular way rather than a very linear way, like we were taught in high school. Here is your outline, your 5-paragraph essay, your introduction, your conclusion, your 3 main points, boom, boom, boom. Each paragraph has each paragraph has, 3 sentences that make your subpoints, boom, boom, boom. And there you go. You've got complete thoughts. Great. He doesn't write that way, or at least it doesn't seem that way. And it doesn't sound like he tells stories that way either. But he's always, even when it seems like he goes way off sideways, always comes back and makes a point. And if there's a lesson there about salespeople, is when your sales calls go way out sideways because you start telling a story, a lot of people forget to bring it back and make that point that they tried to make.
Right.
When you don't make that point, you don't close sales. When you don't make that point, you lose people and you don't get second meetings. And it's, I think if you can learn to tell creative, flowing stories like he does, then you'll do a lot better for yourself.
No, I agree. I think, he does a great job of telling a story, like the whole military war games type exercise.
Mm-hmm.
At first you're like, okay, is this about the guy that was really a great Marine with this, tactical knowledge? But I mean, he had a point to it. And it was kind of interesting, actually, when they realized they got their butts kicked, they changed the rules.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a minute, changed the rules. And then, of course, the blue team won, which just like, but the point was he drove home a message. And so, as I see a lot of things, Larry Levine talks about being able to tell a story. It's, having a story, but like you said, Jeff, is come back to, close it out and have your purpose in place. So,
right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and remembering too that people can only handle so much. You gotta kind of, sometimes you have to pull some stuff out of the story in order to make sure that point is received.
I've been known to wander, let's say, with my words.
Me too. I think we all wander.
Some people think it's endearing. Many customers don't.
The important people think it's endearing, right?
I hope so. Is that why they're important? That might be why they're important.
Oh, now that sounds like a conundrum.
Oh, that's right. That's chicken or the egg, right? Oh,
I love it. All right. So number 1 takeaway.
Trust your intuition.
You thin slice more than you realize.
Yeah.
You do it actually not automatically, but you might do it subconsciously. And that feeds your intuition. That's what I think.
I think you have to trust your intuition enough to investigate it. Let me qualify that. Trust your intuition enough to investigate it.
Yeah. And I think combining both of those, and they both lead to awareness. Mm-hmm. So awareness is the key to good connection and good understanding between people.
Yeah, and I'm gonna further elaborate. I'm gonna say trust your intuition enough to investigate it, but don't overanalyze overanalyze the minutia of it to where you go astray. Because I think your initial thin slice, your initial impression is valid, and you seek to what's the word I'm looking to, confirm that intuition with your investigation. Don't get so carried away with the data that you totally dismiss your initial impression. When you talk about someone with a bunch of tattoos, there's validity in that initial impression. You may learn that this is a choir boy, right? Just to use a stupid term, but you may find that this person's destined for sainthood. They just happen to have tattoos. That totally, destroys, right, your initial impression. But that doesn't mean that your initial impression wasn't valid. It just means that with further investigation, you learned something about that initial impression. And I hope I'm not straying too much, right? It's not that your initial impression was wrong. It's that your initial impression wasn't entirely truthful. That's different. Right? Because the last thing you want to do is talk yourself out of that intuition, which is built on a lifetime of experience. Now, all of a sudden, if you can't trust your intuition, well, then you're basically denying all of your lifetime, worth of experience. And I think all that goes to something.
I think also, and I'm trying to think of how to say this. I'll just kind of blurt it out as like,
Yeah.
it's okay to be wrong.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
it's, if I looked at you and thin slice you, not knowing that you like golf and beer, it's okay to be wrong. And that just means you're human, but doesn't mean that you should stop intuition and thin slicing, because more times out of less, you're going to be right. It's going to be right.
Yeah,
Right.
and you know what? I do like golf and beer, but I don't want to be known specifically as someone just known as someone who liked golf and beer either. Like that's an interesting thing that, the way you said it there made me think about it. Like, yeah, I'm wearing a golf shirt. It's got a logo of a golf course on it. I'm playing golf later today. Like I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do. I also happen to really like beer because I came up at a time when the craft beer kind of culture was taken over. But if you reduce me to a golfer who drinks beer, that paints a completely different picture of a person than a person that I feel that I actually am. So I think that's a really good way to sum it up, Bill.
Yeah, I just the whole tattoo thing, and having and you guys will find this funny is my daughter now has 2 tattoos, and I'm not gonna lie, I was pissed when she got the first one, and then the second
Sure.
I was like, and it's under her armpit, but I said, just so you know, you get one chance at a first impression. She's a nursing student, and I'm like, so just keep that in mind. I can only help you so far, and then you're on your own. So.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
My youngest came home with a nose ring the other day, and I didn't comment on it for hours until she said something at dinner. She's like, "Mom, I can't believe you haven't said anything about my nose ring." I'm like, what would you like for me to say?
Yes. Yes. How can I validate you
like,
in this
you know
moment?
what? I'm not sure that I want to offer anything at this point. So you're 22 years old. It's your own life. It's your own body. So go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And you can pull those out.
You can. She has a tattoo too, though. Yeah. So there you go.
It's awesome. Awesome. Bill, thanks for hopping on.
Yeah, it's very nice to meet you. We've been seeing you on LinkedIn. I know that Larry had shared that you guys had connected. So
yeah, great guy. I love you guys are doing great work. Keep it up. You're my favorite on Monday, and I'm in week 2 of being back at SunGuard, so I've been a little lax on LinkedIn just because I've been swamped getting into my accounts. But no, I wanted to do the Jocko book because I've listened to it probably 3 times. I've read it twice. I have his field manual. If you don't have that,
the field manual is really good. Yeah, I've got it on iTunes. I listen to him read it. Yeah,
that's even better. Actually, the fact that he and Leif read the Audible version makes it so much more impactful.
Yeah, that's actually a big inspiration for the Monday Musing this coming Monday. So I've been thinking a lot about Jocko ever since I read that, and one of my favorite. And I laugh because it's so goofy, and I swear I'm sure he laughs at himself too. And he's a great follow on Instagram and on Twitter because he just posts these videos, and they're 30 seconds long. And what was the one yesterday? He's like, it's Monday. Scored a victory on Monday because I got up early, got my stuff done, and it's Jocko 1, Monday 0. He's like, you know what I'm going to do, y'all? I'm going to run up the score. Go get some. And it's just, I swear, he's playing to his audience. That's fine. It's interesting to hear him on his own podcast when he just kind of gets real and gets really engaged and engrossed in something. But get some. That's Monday's musing. And making a game out of the work that you need to do. No, go do it. Go get it. Just go get it.
Get excited about it too.
Oh yeah.
So the last thing, and I have to jump to a call, is when he brings on either his former team members or other SEALs, it's absolutely humbling, and because everybody wants to fixate on buds, but it's like what some of these guys have led some, he's just some crazy lives. He had a guy on, and if you haven't heard it, I've got the book here, and he's from Michigan. Jeff, you might know him, Sergeant Travis Mills.
No, don't know.
It's called Tough as They Come. He's the 4th quadruple amputee, no arms, no legs.
Oh, wow.
if you go back in the episode, the book, it's called Tough as They Come. He's got a foundation in Maine. Where was he in Michigan? I can probably tell you. He's a Michigan football player.
The name sounds familiar, but
14-hour trip Michigan to Fort Bragg. I played. I don't know where in Michigan he was from, but he's a Michigan boy.
Okay.
And Staff Sergeant Travis Mills, and it by far was. It taught. I mean, I had just pulled the car over and I just sat there and I was like, dang, this was so humbling. And this guy has children. He speaks. He's, if you listen to him, you would never know that he has no arms, no legs. He's got a prosthetic arm. He's got a wedding ring on his arm. And it's so those are the guys where it's like, it's super humbling, but there's still tons of takeaways like Jocko. Monday Jocko 1, Monday 0, just never quit, and it's pretty humbling. So
very cool. Well, congratulations on the new gig, or the not so new gig.
Right, the new old gig. Yeah, it's good. I was only gone a couple of months, and it worked out really well. So
that's excellent.
Yeah.
I love it. And we'd love to have you back. Come back and join us on one of these. And
we'll be back for the one thing, because it'll give me an excuse to listen to it again and reread it. So awesome.
Yeah.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Dig
All
it.
right.
All right.
I guess that's it for us. So we didn't do an intro on this. I guess it doesn't really matter if we did an intro or not. But you've been listening to the Why and the Why podcast, book discussion on Malcolm Gladwell's Blink. And if you want to join us next month, we will have that information out on the website for the one thing. And with that, Jeff, I think that's it.
Well, book clubs are important. Books are important, and they help you understand your why. And when you understand your why,
your hows and your whats get much better. Why do you always make me say that?
Because I fumble it when I do. That's why.
I love it. Excellent.
One of these days you're gonna beat me to the punch, and I'm gonna trip and fall over myself, and it's gonna be fine. You're gonna have a good laugh at my expense, and everybody's gonna love it.
It'll be awesome. That's good stuff. All right, take care, Bill. Thanks so much.